Thank you very much, Farhad. So no questions. Everybody's got all that? You've had, what, 15 minutes to sit with that data, right? No, actually, I really make a joke because in this cycle, the complexity of the studies have really, it's really grown. And as Bill noted, it took us a while to go through the studies. And so that's something that we want to be conscious of. We have just a short amount of time to go through the high-level results today. But I wanted to just take a few minutes to try to boil some of those things down a bit and take just a slice of those results and see if we can focus on one climate zone, just one little scenario, and see if we can maybe compare things a little bit more easily. Okay. Quick review. The standards, fundamental structure of the standards is a performance-based structure. So the standard sets the minimum requirement, and then it leaves it up to the builders how they meet that. Okay, so there's a lot of different flexibility. Okay, and that's how the REACH codes are structured. That's how these studies are structured. So they set a requirement, and then the designers get to meet it however they do. As Bill mentioned, and as Farhad also mentioned, in the low-rise standards this year, there's now 2 different paths for compliance, 2 different baselines, one for mixed fuel, one for all electric. Okay, and any local energy ordinance has to show a path for each, it has to show a cost-effective path option for each path. So you have to have an all-electric and you have to have a mixed fuel option. Okay, that's on the res side. That's because there are 2 baselines. Okay, so the objective of the study is for us to go through and to find this cost-effective, non-preempted option. Are there paths, are there packages of measures that are cost-effective, that meet the federal requirements that you can install and that you can mandate? The study doesn't, it sets the parameters for an ordinance, but it doesn't necessarily specify the exact specifications or requirements. It really kind of creates a box around what those requirements might be, okay? What it doesn't do, it's not a study of best design practices in any way. It's not intended to be. The package we picked, is especially the non-preempted package, is a package selected to check the federal box. It is not a recommendation for design. And it's also not a list of measures that are required to meet the ordinance. This is something that creates a lot of different confusion, a lot of confusion with many people. We have packages listed in the studies, but that's just an example. Those are representative packages to document that there are cost-effective options. Again, designers can do whatever they need to do with the compliant measures to meet the requirements of the REACH code, okay? So I'm just going to kind of jump right in here. It should not, I apologize. Something happened to my thing here. I have had a problem with my presentation, and I apologize here. That is not how it should go. All right, so we're just going to show the whole thing. I'm not sure what happened to the presentation, but some of the animation got messed up here, and I apologize. What I'd like to start with, though, is just to show you, okay, we've got a table here, and what I've done is I've pulled out the single-family results for Climate Zone 3. Okay, that's our climate zone right here in San Francisco, Oakland, a lot of the Bay Area. Okay, if you look down the left column, there are 3 different options as Bill described. There's the mixed fuel option with efficiency only packages as well as efficiency plus PV, the all electric option, and then the comparison of the 2. Okay, I want to just start by looking at only the efficiency options. And so that's the first 2 on the top and the first 2 in the all-electric section. Okay. There was a mention that perhaps we're nearing the end of the road with efficiency, and I think in some climates that may be true. However, looking at these results and in this climate, we can see that there are cost-effective options for efficiency-only packages on both the mixed fuel as well as the all-electric side. Okay. Not only that, we have cost-effective non-preempted and what we call a preempted option. The non-preempted option, again, checks the federal box that doesn't use any high-efficiency equipment. We include the preempted option, though, so that people can get an idea of, it's really more of a package that we think more builders will install. Typically, people opt to choose some high-efficiency equipment as well as other measures in their package. And so we try to look at that as more representative of what we think projects might actually look like in the end. And as you can see, when you do that, on the mixed fuel side, it actually improves your cost effectiveness. But on the all-electric side, in this case, it actually reduces it quite a bit. Okay? Okay. All right. So one of the other things to note about the efficiency-only options is that the incremental cost is modest. So these are really great options, especially if you're concerned about if you have maybe a lot of first-time home buyers in your jurisdiction or something like that, and there's a lot of concern about people qualifying for a mortgage. If you don't want to add a whole big incremental cost on top of the cost to build, you want to add a relatively reasonable small incremental cost, a couple $1,000s. You can get quite a bit of savings. You can actually get about 20% savings in greenhouse gas emissions. In addition, that 2.5 delta EDR actually translates to about a 15% compliance margin. So you're actually exceeding the code by about 15 to 20% if you look at just an efficiency-only package. Yes, Ann? Never. That's the maximum reduction that we found to be cost-effective. Is within the range. Right. That's correct. And on the electric side, between 0 and 4. Okay. Any other questions to start that? Okay. So with an efficiency-only reach code, you do have a very low incremental cost. There are cost-effective options in this climate zone. And it does actually result in a modest amount of greenhouse gas reductions. Are any of your jurisdictions considering an efficiency-only reach code this time? Not even considering? Yes, maybe? Okay. Yay. We got one at least. Okay. Fabulous. Kind of, sort of, not sure.
Scope that was submitted. So I think everybody's patiently waiting for today's presentation.
Okay. Well, it is a good option if you want to do something that's incrementally better than the state code. So I want to change now and switch over to the efficiency plus PV option. And that is this line, the bottom line on the mixed fuel, and the last two lines on the all-electric side. Okay? As you can see, the delta EDR on the mixed fuel side, we'll take that first, jumps dramatically. We go up to a 10 here. And that is where we've added a PV system and battery. As Bill noted, the code requires that you have enough PV to offset your electricity use in a mixed fill home. So you're not allowed to increase that size unless you also add battery storage. Okay, so that is why our run here shows both. There is about a $4,600 incremental cost with that option. And as you can see from an on-bill perspective or the customer's perspective looking at utility bills, it's not a cost-effective option. It is cost-effective from the TDV perspective, and that's from the code perspective. Now, in order to pass a REACH code, it only needs to be cost-effective from the TDV, we're using the TDV metric, okay? However, when you do some outreach, you do have to keep in mind that you're talking to people that pay utility bills, and their concern may be more on the on-bill data, okay? So just it's something to keep in mind that officially you don't have to be cost-effective there, but you can get some pushback if you're not on the on-bill side, okay? We're going to move to the all-electric design, and we've got two options there.
This mixed fuel efficiency plus solar PV plus battery, you get an increased cost to the construction of $4,600
right.
approximately, and also operational costs that will exceed for the 30-year time frame.
Correct.
Okay.
From an on-bill perspective. Okay, so that's from the customer's cost. From a TDV perspective, it's cost effective, and that's because the batteries are, you're adding the battery, and they're fairly expensive for relatively little value at this time, from an on-bill. Yes.
There's a number under on bill, let's say 2.1.
Mm-hmm.
What, a percentage of cost to the customer?
That's actually a benefit to cost ratio. So that is saying that there are twice as many benefits as there are costs. It's going to pay back in, I believe a 2 is about in 8 or 9 years. Is that correct, Bill? Somewhere right around there. Typically, I believe it's about 10 years. It translates to about 8 to 10 years. Right. So it's 8 to 10 years. So it will pay back in within the equipment lifetime. Yes.
Just to quickly follow up, is there a discount rate you apply to determine that benefit to cost ratio?
That's the discount rate that Bill was discussing. That is the same discount rate that is used for the state standards. And I have to ask you, Bill, what that number is. I'm sorry, I don't know.
I might have to get into the report. So we assumed, are you talking on bill or TDV here? So, yeah. So with on bill, we're assuming, I believe it's, I thought it was a 3% discount rate and 30-year mortgage and I think 5% loan. I have to look at the numbers, but I can look it up. I have a copy of the report I can give it to.
Thank you. Okay. So moving on, looking at the all-electric side, we've got 2 options there. We have EE plus PV, so that's increasing the PV size from the state required minimum to meet 90% of the load. And then we have EE plus PV plus battery. As you can see, even with a $7,300 incremental cost, the EE plus PV winds up being quite cost effective, approximately a 2 in either looking at it from on-bill or TDV. And in addition to that, for some reason this mouse just jumps all over here. Okay. And once you add the battery, from an on-bill perspective, the cost effectiveness drops quite a bit, by about a third. So really the optimal scenario here is the EE plus PV within the all-electric design. Okay. You also see the numbers jump on the Delta EDR side from a 4, which means we've reduced the EDR by 4 points, to up to 18.5 for when you add the PV. So it's a big jump. Okay. So you can really get a lot of compliance credit on the electric side. So before I talk about the comparison, oh, go ahead, Alice. Yes.
So just when you say there's a lot of compliance credit, I thought that's just from the efficiency though, right? Because there's no longer PV compliance credit?
No, this is on the all-electric side. And there is compliance credit for adding PV to meet the additional load from the all-electric house. The requirement at the state level is that you install enough PV to offset the electricity load for a mixed fuel home. But so as to not disadvantage the all-electric home and say you have to offset all the electricity, so you'd have to buy a much bigger system to the tune of about $7,300, the requirement is that you only have to have the same size as if it were a mixed fuel. So on the all-electric side, that's a perfect segue. Yes, we set that up. No, on the all-electric side, it's actually a little bit easier to exceed the code in this cycle. In the last cycle, it was just the opposite. It was very difficult to exceed the code with an all-electric design. And so consequently, several cities set up their REACH code structure so that they would require that a mixed fuel home exceed the code, but an all-electric home would only have to meet the code. And in our original thinking, everybody thought that would probably be the way that things would go in this cycle. And it made sense at the time when it was more difficult, but in looking at it now, we probably want to maybe take a different look at this and consider the numbers, really. In looking at it, when you look at just the compliance run, you can see that from an on-bill perspective, from the customer's perspective, it's not cost effective. Okay. So this is comparison. This is using natural gas baseline and just switching to a compliant all-electric home. Okay, so there's no EDR reduction, no change in the PV size required. As I said, the same size is required. There is quite a bit of savings from GHG emission standpoint. You get about half. The natural gas home is the total emissions for a standard home are about 1.9 pounds per square foot. For the all-electric, it's 1.0. So you do get a big change there. However, again, even when you consider this cost savings, and this is the cost savings Bill was talking about, it still isn't cost effective for the customer. Now that $4,900 there is also included in the run below here. So when you look at the efficiency plus PV, it's similar to this run above, but it has the approximately a $5,000 discount on the incremental cost because of that savings. So you have about a $4,900 savings from going from gas to all electric. And then what we've done is we've used that savings to invest in the PV system. Okay, and then added a bit more to it, added an additional $2,400 to get that to the 90% place. Okay, so that we offset about 90% of the load, which is apparently the sweet spot in the calcs. Going a little above that is not quite the same, is not quite as good. Okay, so these numbers, this is one thing that is brand new in this cycle, and that is the incremental cost values for things like the site gas infrastructure and switching things out from gas to all electric. We've been consulting with all the utilities to get the values, and the numbers are extremely variable. Okay, we know this. This is what we believe is a typical value for a brand new development, but they change based on who does the trenching. Is there some natural thing in the way? How far do you have to go? There's all kinds of things that can change these values. So one of the things we did is we took a look at this value and we said, okay, so what happens if that savings is lower? Okay, so we already know even if we consider $4,900 savings, it's not cost effective for the customer to just do a compliant run. However, if we reduce that all the way down to $900, so we say there's only a $900 difference, then the option with EE plus PV remains cost effective across all climate zones from both the customer's perspective as well as a TDV perspective. So if those costs go down, that savings is different. There's all, I know that there will be different numbers in different jurisdictions and different situations. There really is a range within which the cost to exceed the code with an efficiency and PV package is still cost effective, both to the customer and from a system perspective. Question? Yes.
Is there any sensitivity analysis included to what you just talked about or other factors in the study?
We did the sensitivity to the cost. Which other factors are you thinking?
I actually don't know.
Okay.
I'm asking that as much as anything. In other words, sort of trying to understand those bands, those to consider. In other words, because the savings could go in either direction, right?
The incremental cost, certainly. Yes, absolutely. I know that we did look at oversizing the PV system a little bit more. We went to like 120% of the load with the battery, but that was not optimal. And so they backed back off of that. And I think Bill can probably maybe provide a bit more information there.
Well, so from the cost standpoint, for each case, we did look at where the kind of from an on-bill standpoint, what the incremental cost would be to be cost effective from an on-bill standpoint. So we did some sensitivity on that one. We don't have those values in here, but they will be in the report. We also, what was that? I forgot what Misti was talking about, but regarding the PV, we did do some sensitivity with the PV sizing. We chose the PV sizing based upon what we thought was most optimal. You could size up to maybe 120% if you had a battery, but it wasn't as cost effective. It was still maybe cost effective in a lot of these packages, but maybe not quite as cost effective. We found that for the PV alone, the 90% was the sweet spot just because of the minimum bill. You add to 100%, it's still cost effective, but you're still got that minimum bill, and so that additional 10% just lowers the cost effectiveness a little bit.
So it's my day for technical problems. I'm just, for some reason the computer just turned off. Okay, good. I actually prefer questions anyway. Go ahead.
I just don't know that I understand delta EDR. So are we talking about that it's the delta in between what the EDR would have to be from a state baseline and what we would be asking them to achieve? So a higher delta EDR is more energy efficiency work?
That is correct. Okay, let me back up just a little bit. The EDR is actually, yes. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I was trying to get out of the way of everybody else. The EDR is set on a scale that goes from 100 to 0. Okay, 100 it's kind of an odd reference, but it's a federal standard from 2006. A compliant building typically will score between like 25 and 35, 40-ish right now in 2019 on that scale, and the delta is the reduction to that EDR. 0 is zero net energy on that scale. And so our goal is to get to 0. So when we talk about the delta, it's actually a reduced EDR, okay? And that's what we're looking at. It's a very different way that we're looking at compliance now, and so we're all kind of getting used to that.
So when we see like a delta EDR of 30, that would mean from a baseline building that had an EDR of 40, it would end up with a final EDR of 10. So a mixed fuel building with like delta EDR of 5 would only have to have an EDR of.
So just to clarify that, if you're talking about, let's say, mixed fuel as a delta EDR 5, that's how far we could reduce the EDR with a cost-effective package. So that was the limitations of efficiency, let's say, to maintain cost effectiveness. Where with the all-electric packages, we were able to, especially when you added PV, because of the cost effectiveness of it, you were able to get further. And so we showed the limits of that reduction.
So basically, the reason that we're going with the delta EDR structure, even though it seems a little bit more complex, is that there are, the EDR score can vary quite significantly, even though a building may have similar efficiency characteristics within the same climate zone. And so it varies by building size and things like that. So we can't set an absolute number and be certain that we'd be requiring essentially the same kind of a lift from everybody by doing that. So that's why we're going with the delta EDR at this time. It is a little bit different, definitely. And all of us are.
You could argue that if, for example, Marin County wanted to maintain a similar policy message to what it currently has on the books, it could adopt an EDR across the board, delta EDR across the board of 10, right? And that would slightly favor all electric based on these results, but would require PV and efficiency beyond code and allow the consumer choice between the types.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. Yes. One of the issues with that, Barry, though, is you've got to be a little bit careful. If you went down to 10 on the electric side, you would not necessarily be requiring efficiency on that side, because you could do it with just PV. You do have to be a little bit careful. We used to have a range that was a linear range that we could work within, and now it's really more of a stepped kind of a process where we've kind of got numbers for efficiency and then another group down here once you start looking at renewables. Okay, one more question, then I'm going to kind of move on. Yeah, Christine?
I have a question on the bottom row, the mixed use all electric, the comply only. Not sure if I completely understand. Does that mean that if there's a mixed fuel home, but you are mandating that it has to be all electric ready, but it still has all the gas?
No, let me explain that. It's actually it's an all electric home, and it's compared to in the standards, all electric homes are compared to an electric baseline now. But we've had a lot of questions about what the difference between a mixed fuel home and an all-electric home might be. So we took a look at that in our analysis. And so this analysis, the bottom two rows, show the difference between a natural gas compliant home, a mixed fuel home, and an all-electric compliant home. So they both just comply. But in the case of the all-electric home, you get a 0.9 pounds per square foot of GHG savings. You get, in this case, about a $4,900 savings in the installation costs. And from a TDV perspective, it's cost effective, but not for the customer. However, if you go one step beyond that and require that the home be also efficient and include some PV, then you can get to really some very impressive cost effectiveness numbers. This benefit to cost ratio of 4, that means it's going to pay back in like, 5 to 7 years. And a benefit to cost ratio here shown as greater than 1 is immediate benefits. And I wanted to address one of the things you'd asked, Pierre, because one of the reasons we had not considered the additional gas cost increase is because we did hit the threshold already. So that would just make it even more cost effective.
Just want to point out 2 things.
Yes.
First, the comply only line second to last. I mean, it's already to code, so it's already efficient, right? So it doesn't have the extra efficiency, but it's already efficient to code.
It's to code.
Right. The cost-benefit ratio, the only problem with this line is the cost-benefit ratio, which is for the customer, which is 0.8. So it's not cost-effective from the customer perspective. And that's where the gas, having the right rates that reflect the current requested increases would potentially make this cost-effective for the customer. And that's important because then you'd have an electric option that would be cost-effective, not just for TDV, which customers don't care about, but for customers that would be $5,000 cheaper to build and cost-effective over its lifetime.
Perhaps, depending on how far that goes. And in some cases, yes.
Could we take this piece of the conversation offline just because we're running a little late?
Thank you.
We want to let Misti have a chance to finish her slides, so we can save questions for the end. That'd be great.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And sorry, I'm going over here a little bit. I did want to point out one other thing, though, and that is that there are cost-effective efficiency options here. And so I think it's very important that we don't lose sight of that. A lot of people kind of buy into the fallacy. Really, it's a myth. And it's easy in our excitement we have this option, we have this thing that's going to help us. Well, it's going to be clean generation, so it doesn't matter how much we use. But that's really not true. This movement towards electrification is going to add a significant amount of load on the grid. And it's something we need to do. We need to be mindful of as we do it. We don't want to just rush into it and just, perhaps do it badly. Let's do it the best we can. Let's do it now. It's not that hard. It might be a little bit more expensive now, but it pays back very quickly. That's a very quick payback of 4.0. And I would argue that you could even possibly get more savings here. And the reason I say that is that if somebody's building an all-electric home, chances are they're going to be installing a PV system that's larger than what's required by code. They're probably going to be installing it. So some of that incremental cost is probably already going to be borne by the customer. So I think you could even get even further here. The other thing to consider is as we go forward in looking at electrification, I recently read a report that was produced by the Regulatory Assistance Project, and in it, they actually defined what they call beneficial electrification. And here's all my nice things that happen there. Okay, and this is the way they defined it. They say for electrification to be considered beneficial, it has to meet one of the following conditions without adversely affecting the other two. Okay, so it has to save money, enable better grid management, and reduce negative environmental impacts. So in the case where it's not cost effective for the customer, that wouldn't meet this definition because it would not save the consumers money. Now, depending on how the rates do actually increase and how we apply those, and I have to talk to you about that because there's some trickiness in that that we have to consider. It's a little bit trickier than it sounds. But in that case where it doesn't really meet the cost effectiveness bar for the customer, it wouldn't really be considered beneficial electrification by them. So it's something to keep in mind as we go forward, is to just really we need to still try to do the best we can. Okay, I'm going to run through this a little bit quickly because I know I'm keeping you here from lunch now. Basically, when it all comes down to it, these are the target numbers for Climate Zone 3. If you're looking at efficiency only, you have 2.5 on mixed fuel and 4 on all electric. If you were to set the same bar for both, you would have to set it at the lower number, okay, because we don't have a mixed fuel design that can achieve a 4 EDR, delta EDR, okay? I would highly recommend, if you're going to look at kind of your best case for mixed fuel and say that if you're going to build mixed fuel, you have to do it very well, save as much GHG as possible, save as much energy. You're looking at this efficiency plus PV plus battery. It's about a $5,000 incremental cost. I would highly recommend also considering that for the all-electric side. It is easier if, like I said, if somebody's building an all-electric home, they're probably going to size their PV system that way anyway. It really isn't as big of a lift as it seems. So anyway, that's the res side. I'm going to run on to non-res really quickly. Non-res is a little bit more straightforward. It hasn't changed the metric. We still are looking at compliance margin. And I've shown 2 different compliance zones, climate zones here, just so that you can see that while the numbers are different, the trend is the same. The pattern's the same. It's pretty consistent across all the climate zones, okay? What we have here is climate zone 6 and 12. 6 is actually down in the Santa Monica, Los Angeles area, and 12 is here in the kind of in the East Bay, Central Valley area. And I put those up so that folks on the webinar also saw something from their area. But in looking at these numbers, they're actually a lot more straightforward. We still have the efficiency and the efficiency plus renewables options for both mixed fuel and all electric, but we're looking at a compliance margin now. In the case of Climate Zone 6, we have for mixed fuel 20% and all electric 18%. So again, in the non-res realm for medium offices, we've got cost-effective energy efficiency packages in both cases. Quite cost-effective, as a matter of fact, in Climate Zone 12, if you come down here, you've got numbers above 2 on bill, and down here for the all-electric side, these greater than 1 numbers mean basically you have incremental cost savings as well as on-bill savings. So immediate benefits. And that's what that number means down there. Essentially, we have, as Farhad mentioned, they've only looked at one size PV right now, and that was limiting it at 50% of the roof area. In the next iteration, we are going to look at a little bit more of a range so that you have a little bit of a difference, because what you can see here is the efficiency package has a relatively modest incremental cost. But when you go up to the PV package, the incremental cost goes up quite a bit here. And so you may be considering quite a bit. And that's, that's offsetting most of the load. Now, so you may be considering something, a minimum requirement that is smaller than that. And we believe that will also show to be cost effective, but we have not done all of the sensitivity analysis there. And that will be in the next iteration. So you may be looking at something that maybe you're not quite ready to require a $250,000 incremental cost on a building. You might be, but you might not. Okay. But in any case, we have cost-effective packages for all of these options. So any of these options that you're interested in will work in either of these climate zones. So as I said, the study kind of draws a box around what you might be able to do. And I've got Climate Zone 6 up here because it really provides a lot of different options for how somebody might set an ordinance, okay, based on the results from this study. We show the 20% and 18% compliance margins here as cost effective as the maximum. You could adopt those numbers. You could also choose to reduce the mixed fuel down to 18% so they're the same. Another option might be to adopt CalGreen Tier 1 or Tier 2 for either or both of the design types. Perhaps you want to adopt a Tier 1 for the all-electric and Tier 2 for mixed fuel in order to stretch the mixed fuel just a little bit beyond. You could also select a number in between. In this case, we've set the maximum, and anything within that is actually cost-effective. Okay, so you could set your ordinance however you like to meet these requirements. Does that make sense? Okay. So on the horizon, we will be releasing the public draft of the studies by next Friday, March 15th. And we are going to be following up with a webinar to talk about the cost effectiveness studies specifically. We can get in depth about the assumptions and how we might change some of those and some of the suggestions for running different options. And then we will have a final version of the report is due June 30th. I anticipate we may have some releases in between then as different information comes out, but I don't know that right now. We are working in concert with the CEC, and so that timing may vary a little bit as software gets certified and we have to make the final runs and things like that. Right now we're targeting June 30th for that date. Wanted to mention that these are just the first set of cost effectiveness studies that we plan to do. As a lot of people mentioned, there are many, many existing buildings out there and they present quite an opportunity themselves. So we'll be doing a retrofit study as well on res and non-res. Multifamily buildings are a huge interest. It's another topic and there's a lot of work to be done on that side, but we do plan on addressing those as well as looking at PV systems on parking garages. I encourage you, if you have other interests, if your jurisdiction or your region is interested in looking at other options or some sort of a twist on the options we've already studied, please contact us. We have the our contact information there. You can contact us directly or via the website. If you have other ideas, please let us know. We're very interested and oftentimes we can work, we can do variations on the study that meet your needs, that can meet individual needs. We can also provide other resources such as model language, help you with presentations, things like that, other implementation tools. We've done checklists and handouts, things like that. So I urge you to call us if you'd like any technical support. We're happy to help. So yes. For model language, we are hoping to have the model language ready with the report as well. Hopefully before, but without results, we can get most of it done, but we can't quite set up the final until we know the results. Yes, but I think we can have at least a template that may still have placeholders before that. And that's what I think. It won't be complete because we will have to have the final results. Okay, thanks.